What if I told you the same bloodlines that ran Viking slave markets are still in power today, and the Epstein files just proved it? This documentary traces the DNA from medieval conquest to modern elite, every claim sourced. From Lincolnshire to the shores of the Thames estuary, the genetic signature of Scandinavian invaders remains detectable, over 1,000 years after they arrived. This wasn't immigration, it was conquest. In the year 865, the Great Heathen Army landed on the coast of East Anglia. Within a decade, they had carved England in half. The region they controlled became known as the Danelaw, land under Danish law. English law didn't apply. English kings held no power. The people who lived there answered to Norse chieftains, or they didn't answer at all. The Danelaw wasn't just a territory. It was a legal system, and within that system existed a category of human being that most modern people have never heard of. A thrall was property. They could be bought, sold, traded, gifted. They could be killed without legal consequence. They could be sacrificed, and they were, regularly, at funerals, at seasonal rituals, at the whim of their owners. The DNA of those Vikings is still in England. The question this documentary asks is simple. Did the system they brought ever really disappear? Let's be precise about what Vikings did. Modern media romanticizes them as explorers and warriors. They were, but they were also the most prolific human traffickers medieval Europe had ever seen. The scale was industrial. Irish monasteries weren't just raided for gold and silver, they were raided for people. Monks, nuns, children. Anyone who could be captured and transported was captured and transported. The same pattern repeated across Britain, Scotland, France, and deep into Eastern Europe. The word slave itself derives from Slav, because so many Slavic people were trafficked by Norse traders that their ethnic name became synonymous with bondage. Where did these people go? Some stayed in Scandinavia as domestic thralls, but the most profitable route ran east and south, to Constantinople, to Baghdad, to the wealthy courts of the Islamic world, where Norse traders exchanged human cargo for silver, silk, and spices. The Arab chronicler Ibn Fadlan travelled among the Rus Vikings in the 10th century. He documented their practices in detail: the slave markets, the ritual killings, the casual brutality. He witnessed a chieftain's funeral where a slave girl was selected for sacrifice. She was given intoxicants. She was passed among the chieftain's men. Then she was strangled and stabbed on the funeral ship before it was set ablaze. This was standard practice, documented by eyewitnesses, confirmed by archaeology. Islands played a crucial role in this system. Viking slave traders used coastal islands as holding stations, places where human cargo could be collected, sorted, and held before transport to markets. Isolated locations beyond the reach of law where anything could happen to the people held there. Remember that, we'll come back to it. In the year 911, a Viking chieftain named Rollo made a deal with the French king. Rollo had been raiding the Seine Valley for years. Paris itself had been besieged. The French king, unable to defeat him, offered a bargain: land in exchange for loyalty and conversion to Christianity. Rollo accepted. The territory he received became known as Normandy, land of the Northmen. The Vikings who settled there didn't disappear. They adapted. They learned French. They adopted Christianity. They became counts and dukes. But they didn't forget how to conquer. In 1066, William, direct descendant of Rollo, crossed the English Channel and defeated the Anglo-Saxon King Harold at the Battle of Hastings. Within a generation, the entire English ruling class had been replaced. This wasn't a change of government, it was a hostile takeover of an entire country. The Norman aristocracy that William installed owned everything: the land, the courts, the church positions. They built castles to dominate the population. They created the Doomsday Book to inventory their new possessions, including the people who worked the land. The Anglo-Saxon nobles who survived either fled, submitted, or were killed. Their daughters were married to Norman lords. Their sons were disinherited. Their language was suppressed, which is why English legal and governmental terms still come from French, while farming terms come from Anglo-Saxon. Those Norman families, the ones who came over with William, they didn't fade away. Many of their descendants are still in the House of Lords today, still own the land their ancestors took in 1066, still move in circles of power that most British people will never enter. The Viking conquest of England happened twice. First the Danelaw, then the Normans, and the second one never really ended. Let's trace a specific bloodline. Queen Elizabeth II, who reigned until 2022, was a direct descendant of William the Conqueror. So is King Charles III. So is Prince William. So is Prince Andrew. This isn't disputed, it's genealogy. The royal family's own records confirm it. Prince Andrew, Duke of York, son of the late Queen, brother of the current King, is a documented descendant of the Viking chieftain Rollo. Prince Andrew was also a documented associate of Jeffrey Epstein. He was photographed with Virginia Giuffre, who testified that she was trafficked to him when she was 17 years old. He visited Epstein's properties. He maintained the friendship even after Epstein's first conviction in 2008. In 2022, facing a civil lawsuit from Giuffre, Prince Andrew paid a settlement reported to be around £12 million. He admitted no wrongdoing, but he paid. A direct descendant of Viking conquerors, connected to a modern trafficking operation. This is not speculation, it's public record. Now we need to talk about how Jeffrey Epstein connected to British power. The answer is a woman named Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine is the daughter of Robert Maxwell, one of the most extraordinary and disturbing figures in 20th century British history. Robert Maxwell was born Jan Ludwig Hyman Benjamin Hock in Czechoslovakia in 1923. His family was Jewish. Most of them were killed in the Holocaust. He escaped, made his way to Britain, fought in World War II, and was decorated for bravery. After the war, he built a publishing empire, Pergamon Press, Mirror Group newspapers. He became a member of Parliament. He owned football clubs. He moved among prime ministers and presidents. He was also, according to multiple intelligence sources, a spy. The British Foreign Office suspected him of being a secret agent of a foreign government. Not just one government, possibly a double or triple agent working with MI6, the Soviet KGB, and Israel's Mossad. When Maxwell died in 1991, found floating in the Atlantic after apparently falling from his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, his funeral told a story. He was buried on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. The Israeli Prime Minister attended. The Israeli President attended. At least 6 serving and former heads of Israeli intelligence attended. Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir delivered remarks. He said that Robert Maxwell has done more for Israel than can today be said. Think about that sentence. At a public funeral, the Prime Minister of Israel stating on the record that what Maxwell did for the country cannot be publicly disclosed. After his death, £400 million was found missing from his company's pension funds. His empire collapsed. His name became synonymous with fraud. But his daughter, Ghislaine, had already made a new connection. Around 1990, she met Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein owned a private island in the Caribbean. Little St. James, part of the US Virgin Islands, but close to the British Virgin Islands, British territory. The parallels to Viking operations are striking. An island, isolated, beyond easy oversight, a place where people could be brought, held, and subjected to whatever those in power wanted to do to them. A place where normal laws didn't seem to apply. Epstein didn't raid monasteries. He recruited from trailer parks, high schools, massage schools. He targeted the vulnerable, girls from broken homes, girls who needed money, girls whose complaints wouldn't be believed. The method changed, the function didn't. Unlike the Viking chieftains, who built their power on the labour and bodies of thralls, Epstein built relationships with the powerful by providing access to victims. This is documented in court records. In January 2024, documents from the Ghislaine Maxwell defamation case were unsealed. Names emerged, flight logs were examined, depositions became public. In January 2026, following the Epstein Files Transparency Act, the Department of Justice released 3.5 million pages of documents, over 2,000 videos, over 180,000 images. Among the revelations, email exchanges showing Epstein and someone who appears to be Ghislaine Maxwell discussing how to handle accusers, references to connections with powerful people, evidence of a network that spanned decades. The files also contained something specific about a certain property in Florida. An email chain from 2011 shows Epstein discussing the girl in the new papers, who claimed to have worked at Mar-a-Lago. He writes to a former Trump Organization executive asking how to verify her claims. He forwards the message to GMAX, Ghislaine Maxwell's known email handle. Her response? "I thought you said not to involve Donald." What does that mean? We don't know. The files raise as many questions as they answer, but they confirm that Epstein's network reached into the highest levels of American and British society. And at the centre of his connection to British power was the daughter of a man who was buried like a head of state in Jerusalem. Vikings practiced human sacrifice. This is documented beyond dispute. The question most people never ask is why. It wasn't religious devotion in the way we might understand it. It served specific social functions. First, power display. The chieftain who could sacrifice a human being was demonstrating absolute authority. He owned life itself. Second, binding through complicity. When multiple people participate in a killing, they are bound together by shared guilt. No one can expose the others without exposing themselves. It creates loyalty through mutual incrimination. Third, intimidation. Anyone who witnessed a sacrifice understood what could happen to them if they disobeyed. Fourth, the disposal of the inconvenient. Thralls who knew too much, who had seen too much, who might talk, they could be eliminated, and the killing framed as religious necessity. Now think about what we know of Epstein's operation. We don't know if ritual sacrifice occurred. We don't have evidence of that. But we do know that the operation functioned to bind powerful people together through shared compromise. Once someone had participated, or even been present, they were implicated. They couldn't expose the operation without exposing themselves. We know that the operation created documentation, photographs, videos, that could be used for leverage. The question isn't whether Epstein practiced Viking sacrifice. The question is whether the social function of sacrifice, binding elites through shared transgression, creating leverage, disposing of the inconvenient, has ever actually stopped. The methods evolve, the function persists. Part 8. The DNA of power. Let's return to the blood. Modern genetic studies have mapped Viking ancestry across Britain. The concentration is highest in the old Danelaw territories, Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, East Anglia, the East Midlands. But there's another concentration that the studies reveal, in the aristocracy. The Norman Conquest brought a specific population, descendants of Rollo's Vikings, into absolute power over England. They intermarried primarily with each other. They maintained their land holdings across generations, They sent their children to the same schools, joined the same clubs, moved in the same circles. This isn't a conspiracy, it's demographics. When researchers study the DNA of the British upper class, they find elevated Scandinavian markers compared to the general English population. The Norman heritage persists, not in mythology, but in measurable genetic signatures. The families that rule have literally different ancestry than the families they rule over. And here's what makes this relevant to the Epstein case. Robert Maxwell moved in those circles. His daughter moved in those circles. Epstein gained access to those circles through Ghislaine. Prince Andrew exists at the very centre of those circles. The DNA isn't what makes people do evil things. There's no gene for cruelty. But there is a system, a 1,000-year-old system, that concentrates power in a small group of interconnected families, shields them from consequences, and allows them to treat others as disposable. The Vikings had a word for disposable people: thralls. We don't use that word anymore, but the category still exists. The Epstein files, released in 2026, contain millions of pages. It will take researchers years to fully process them. But some things are already clear. The operation was larger than one man. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted in 2021 of sex trafficking and conspiracy. She is currently serving a 20-year sentence, but she wasn't the only facilitator. Flight logs show dozens of passengers. The contact book contained hundreds of names. The cover-up was institutional. Epstein's 2008 plea deal in Florida, which allowed him to serve just 13 months with work release privileges, was approved by a prosecutor named Alexander Acosta. Acosta later said he was told that Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. Acosta became Secretary of Labour under President Trump, then resigned when the Epstein case resurfaced. The Department of Justice concluded that there was no evidence of a client list or systematic blackmail operation. But this conclusion has been disputed by lawmakers, who note that over 6 million pages were identified as potentially relevant, and only half were released. What we can document: a network that spanned decades, connected to intelligence services through the Maxwell family, protected by institutional failures, and linked to the highest levels of British aristocracy through Prince Andrew. What we can trace: a bloodline that runs from Viking chieftains to Norman conquerors to the British royal family, the same family that shielded a member connected to a trafficking operation. What we can prove: that the pattern of powerful people exploiting the vulnerable while being protected from consequences is not new. It is at least 1,000 years old. It is woven into the very DNA of the British ruling class, literally. In Viking society, thralls had no legal standing. They could not testify against their masters. They could not own property. They could not refuse. In theory, modern society has abolished these categories. Everyone is equal before the law. In practice, look at what happened. Epstein was convicted in 2008. He served 13 months. He was allowed out of jail 12 hours a day to go to his office. He continued his activities for another decade. Prince Andrew was accused by a trafficking victim. He denied everything. Then he paid millions to settle the lawsuit. He lost his royal duties, his military titles, his public role. But he faced no criminal charges. He lives in a royal residence. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted and imprisoned, but she is the only person from Epstein's inner circle serving significant time. Despite evidence of a network, despite thousands of pages of documents, despite named and photographed participants, she is the only one. The system that protected Viking chieftains when they abused their thralls, legal immunity, social impunity, institutional silence, has modern equivalents. Wealth buys lawyers. Lawyers delay cases until statutes of limitations expire. Settlements include non-disclosure agreements. Prosecutors are pressured. Witnesses die or recant or simply aren't believed. The names change, the methods evolve, the function remains. This documentary is not claiming that the British royal family practices Viking blood sacrifice. This documentary is not claiming that there's a gene for evil. This documentary is not claiming that everything in the Epstein files has been decoded and understood. What this documentary is claiming is simpler and more disturbing. That a system of power, originating in Viking conquest, codified by Norman rule, maintained by aristocratic intermarriage, protected by institutional complicity, has persisted for over 1,000 years. That this system treats certain people as disposable. That it protects its own from consequences. That Jeffrey Epstein operated within this system, connected to it through Ghislaine Maxwell, whose father operated at the intersection of British intelligence, international espionage, and shadowy finance. That Prince Andrew, direct descendant of Viking conquerors, was part of this system and was protected by it, until public pressure became too great. That the DNA of the rulers and the DNA of the ruled are measurably different in Britain, not because of mystical bloodlines, but because of 1,000 years of concentrated power and deliberate separation. The question this documentary leaves you with is not, who are the secret rulers? The question is, why do we still have rulers at all? Why does lineage still matter? Why do some people face consequences and others don't? Why, after everything we've learnt, everything that's been documented, everything that's been released, why is only one person in prison? The Vikings believed they were descended from gods. They believed this gave them the right to take thralls, to sacrifice humans, to rule by force. We don't believe that anymore. Do we? The blood of Vikings flows through Britain. You can measure it, you can map it, you can trace its concentration in certain families, certain postcodes, certain corridors of power. For 1,000 years, that blood has been associated with rule. First through conquest, then through inheritance, now through what we politely call tradition and continuity. The Epstein files are the largest document release related to elite abuse in modern history. 3.5 million pages, thousands of videos, names we recognise, names we don't. What happens next depends on whether this is actually investigated, or whether it quietly fades, like every other scandal that threatened to expose how the system actually works. The Vikings are gone. Their descendants remain. And so do their methods.